All right, let's talk about your transition because I think when you announced you were retiring, that was one of the most surprising retirements because you had been having so much success. And then when you announced you're coming out of retirement to go back to competition, also extremely surprising. What went into that decision?
So my retirement decision?
Well, let's go. Start with retirement and then coming out.
So as many people might know or don't know, I've had hip issues. So back in 2017, I got my first hip surgery where they went in, shaved down my bone, and then I had 2 microfractures done because unknown to me, I was born, both my hips are displaced, so I don't have full hips. I have half coverage. So, and that's not good for wrestling, but any kind of movement that I was doing, whether it's shooting, walking, turning, twisting, as a hip goes in your socket like this, mine was getting jammed up and blocked. I didn't have enough space or coverage. So back in 2017, we found out that was the cause of a lot of my issues that I was facing through college and whatnot. So when I got, fast forward to, what is this, 2021? I knew that I was having these issues, and it was always just kind of like good days, bad days. For a long time, I was bone on bone with my hip and no cartilage, arthritis, stuff like that. So for when I got my first surgery, it was just a prolonged hip replacement and in hopes of recreating my cartilage, which at one point was coming back, and then somewhere in COVID might have disappeared. There's really no way to tell because I would do yearly checks, but then COVID happened, so I had to kind of miss that year. And then, so I'm going on wrestling and training. Oh, this is my good days, my bad days, still feeling like crap a little bit. And yeah, I was having some success. Then I went to my very last match, Zane. When I was warming up, I like slipped and like jammed up my hip. And as I said, I was bone on bone, so it just didn't feel right. And with the whole what happens grind away, my bone was getting soft. So when I jammed up my hip, it just felt like this is not good. And ideally, I went in, I won that match, but from there, I'm like, okay, I got to go out to Vail where I had my first surgery. And typically, when I go get my checkups, they're like, yeah, your hip's good. This is just the process. You might have to, pull back a little bit, and we'll give you like a little injection, like this little lubricant they would give me. But that wasn't the case this time I went back. So when I did go back, I was back to bone on bone, and my hip was actually worse. Like the bone had kind of reformed into like literally like my fist. So instead of a circle, it was like my fist, and there was no space at all. So it was just grinding away. And I had a bunch of cysts on my bone. So, and that's kind of what I was feeling when I would wrestle. So unknown to Virginia Tech at this time, and I always felt bad because, one, I kept that stuff just to myself as far as what I was feeling, because again, I knew I had my good days and my bad days. But when I went out there and they're like, yeah, this isn't good, we're gonna have to do something about it. And they gave me an option, like, your shoulder and your hips are very similar. They were gonna like take a chip off my femur and like screw it in to kind of get that extension for my hip. And they're like, we could do that, or you can get a full hip replacement. And I'm like, well, I don't want to do that, thinking about my just life outside of wrestling. And I had 2 younger girls. So I was like, and I was young. So at this time, I'm 28, turning 29, and with the hip replacements, they shave down some bone, they put a stem down into your femur, that takes away bone, and ideally they last, depending on what you're doing, 20 years or so. So 29, turning 30, 20 years, 50, I'm gonna need another hip replacement. Hopefully we go another whatever, I live a good life, I'm gonna need another hip replacement. So it just did not, that's not good because again, every time they replace it, they take away bone. So I do my research and reach out to people, actually reach out to Ben Askren, and he had the same surgery that I did get, hip resurfacing, where they just kind of take the top of your ball, your femur, they shave or cut that off, and then there's like a little cement ball, or not cement, but metal ball, and they cement it on top of your femur. So that would allow me to be more active. It's the same length as a full hip replacement, but they don't take away as much bone. So later on the line, when you do need the full hip replacement, it's just an easier thing to do, and they preserve your bone. So anyway, I'm like, yeah, I want to do that so I could be active, and like I'm looking like UFC fighters and power lifters, and people get this stuff done and they're still going back. So I'm like, well, there's a chance for me to wrestle too, so that'll be cool. I like that. But my problem was I had went so long with wrestling on my bad hip that I wasn't a good candidate for the surgery, at least to some doctors. So among Virginia Tech and my role here, I was going through these doctors, like all from 2017, sending them my stuff, and they're like, I had one doctor up in Denver, he's like, you wrestle on these hips? And I'm like, yeah, I wrestle, took second and third, and he's like, well, that's good, but we should be giving you a full hip replacement now. And that's what they told me in 2017, but they saved it. So I'm like, nah, I think, this is what I want to do. He said, no, you don't have enough bone. Even if we go in there and clean up all that bad bone, it's not gonna feel good at all, because you don't have enough bone. So when we because they put a metal socket in there as well, so they have to shave the inside of your socket and then your actual femur. So basically they were saying if I get that, then I have a chance of fracturing my femur, and then the hip socket, because there's not enough support there. So to my knowledge and my research, I'm like literally getting down to the nitty gritty. I could have did the surgery myself, like studying. So I'm like sending in my paperwork and all this, and doctors are like, no, it's not good. Your bone, and also on top of that, like my bones weren't big enough. So they have, which I always thought was crazy, they have like the sizing of the pieces. They have the biggest, and then they have the smallest piece. And I was between like the last size and the next biggest size. So they're like, and that's before they shaved the bone. So that was another thing.
Yeah.
So all this stuff is going on, and I'm still here. So I moved here in May. And funny thing, I went up to the Denver doctor, and he's like, no, we can't do a hip resurfacing, just get a hip replacement. And he actually told me that I should get a handicap sticker. It's like to try and put off the hip replacement because I was so young. And I'm like, no, I can't do that. And I did the incline the next day. So that was a funny thing. And I've never,
that's like the anti-handicap.
Yeah, right. Anyway, long story, I go through this round of doctors, and prior to that, I had reached out to the guy that did Ben's surgery, Ben Askren, and unfortunately he retired. So I was like, dang, I missed out on a good doctor. And then through all that, I actually ended up going back to Cleveland Clinic, and the guy said, well, yeah, we can work with you, we'll try. And they did which I've never heard, they were the only doctors, like bone grafting and kind of giving me more bone to work with was the way they were going to counteract me not having enough bone. So they packed my inside of my socket with whatever fake bone, I don't even know what they use. And then they did the surgery. But I also had to sign a waiver because they were like, yeah, since your bone is so small, we don't really know the size. It's like, when we go in, if we can't do it, then we're going to have to give you a full hip replacement. So, wow. And I woke up from surgery, that was my first thing, like, what surgery did we go with? And he's like, oh no, we got it done. We were able to give you the hip resurfacing. So, yeah, that happened. February 1st was when I got my surgery. And then I went, 4 weeks non-weight bearing on the crutches. Then by NCAAs, I was supposed to be off my crutches, but I went to NCAAs. I had my cane. Everybody saw, because it was my first week, being off crutches. And then came back here, doing my rehab, getting all my mobility back. And in June was when I could be to my confidence level as far as getting back on the mat, moving. So that was good. Everything went good. Even just from walking and moving around, I wasn't having my limp that I used to have. I wasn't having that soreness. The only kind of pain I was really having was like the stitches in my scar tissue. So I went back, did my checkup, no fracture, everything was healing fine. And from just doing my rehab and my regular day-to-day moving, I went back and actually went out to Nebraska and got into the science lab, and I was doing all these tests, and my right leg is actually stronger than my left. So that was like a great sign.
Yeah. And
so go back to the doctor, hey, you think that I can get back into it? And it's like, oh yeah, that's why we gave you the surgery, so you could be active again. And so that was good news, and everything's going, and I started rolling around with my resident athletes, and I'm like, yeah, why not? Let's do it. But I got to be all the way in. I can't be halfway out. I've learned that just from being around the sport and seeing other people try and be coach and then hop back in. But since I'm coming off of this surgery, I need to be all the way in, training right and doing the rehab off the mat, on the mat. So yeah, that was big.
So you've been here, you've been at Virginia Tech. What was the decision to go back to Nebraska? Why ultimately Nebraska?
As most people know, one, I went there, I'm an alumni there. They've dealt with my injuries before. They know what I need, how to kind of operate around it. And then really the big sell is the athletic trainer, Tyler Wita, because one, yeah, he's dealt with my first surgery back in 2017. And I know that they know how to push me regardless, on the mat, off the mat. If I need a break, they know how to get it out of me. So I want to be all in. I want to be fully surrounded by those that know how to get the most out of me. And two, yeah, Tyler Reed is the best guy out there to treat my hip, make sure that I'm doing the right things to be able to wrestle, be able to do the grinds, and make sure nothing goes wrong. So that was a big part of it.
When a lot of people heard that you were coming back, I mean, the conversation has been 2024 Olympic trials, 65 or 74, but it sounds like you're thinking about competing well past that, right?
Yeah, so there's no rush, ideally, to go for Olympic trials, just because I haven't been training. It's not fair to my body. It's not fair to, it wouldn't be fair to the athletic, competitive side of myself to try and rush to get back to this place of being able to compete with the top guys as far as where I think I need to be. So here, like even when the announcement was made, it's not like I've been lifting, it's not like I've been training. I've just been rolling around in practice. The idea is to get back into it. And again, I'm coming off of surgery, so I'm not sure where my body will be doing 2-a-days or doing, all those hard workouts and making that hard push. And I'm also like walking around 159, 158. So to go 74 and to get my body right, that'd be a lot. To go 43, I mean, I don't have the muscle. It'd probably be easier to go down. But yeah, that's a quick turnaround. I feel like September is when I plan to move out. Me and my family plan to move out to Nebraska. And then I think trials is in April. So yeah, I don't know. From a competitive standpoint, who knows? We'll see. We'll see how it goes. Give me 2 months and I can make a decision. But yeah, taking it 1 month at a time.
But the decision to come back to competing, it's a pretty long-term decision, right?
Yeah. So before I'm kind of still on my plan. The whole plan was to wrestle until I wasn't having fun or I couldn't really. So I wrestled to that point, literally. Got to that point where I couldn't wrestle and figured that out, and now there's another opportunity to wrestle. And honestly, it's great to just be in I'm deciding if I want to coach or wrestle. And not too many people, that's not a big deal. Some people don't get to do what they love their whole life. So I'm always grateful to have the opportunity to still be around the sport and to pursue the things that I want to do.
Your last match in competition, you mentioned, was against Zane Rutherford. You weren't. I don't think anybody knew you weren't feeling well at the time. Your hip was messed up. You got the win. Since then, Zane's won a medal at the Worlds. How much confidence do you take in yourself, seeing the success that Zane's had, and just seeing where you stacked up against him right before you were done?
Yeah, I felt confident before, and not just against Zane. And like to your point, like a lot of people didn't know what I was dealing with. So I think that's really a big part in my head, and what I'm excited about is like, well, I was beating a lot of people or in some competitive matches with one leg. So now I'm going to be actually wrestling with better legs. And I'm telling you, like, I could do, a whole little documentary about that. If literally you go through my matches and my stance is just getting higher and higher as the things got worse. But to be able to compete the way I was feeling and have success, now it's just going to be even, I feel like, even better, a better James Green. So if you thought I was a good wrestler before, I'll be a lot better.
People that thought you were going to come back for maybe just the Olympics trials and then move on, I mean, this is big news.
Yeah, no, I'm here for the long time, so it's going to be fun. And honestly, it was good that I took this break, just because I'm excited to try the things that I picked up in my coaching role. And like I mentioned before, like I was, as an athlete, you're going to do, this is what I'm good at, this is what I'm going to do, I'm going to go out, operate on this game plan. But in coaching, I've been more open to, I'm seeing things that other athletes do or try, and I'm like, man, I wonder how I could put that into my wrestling, which I didn't do before. And the fact that I have all these kind of things in my head that I'd like to try to put into my wrestling. So it's going to be like I'm really starting over. For the longest time, I was learning how I was wrestling wrong, like the wrong way to get through things because of my hip. Now I can actually do a little bit more as far as even getting down in my stance and staying, sit in the corner or doing just a little different things with my legs now. For the longest, because I wanted to keep wrestling, I would be wrestling lefty. So now to actually, I still have that in my bag to wrestle lefty, to wrestle with my right leg now. It's going to be fun.
So just to put it in perspective, at the beginning of the surgery, you didn't know when you went under, you didn't know if they were going to be able to do the surgery that would allow you to compete again, or if it would just be a different surgery and you would wake up and not be able to compete. It was that close?
Yeah. So my bone was, I didn't have, they have to, your bone has to be, your bone density has to be enough that the piece is going to fit and support, is going to be able to support the piece, and then your weight and all that stuff. So, and that's all the bad bones. So they have to shave down all that bad stuff, and it's going to get even smaller.
Yeah.
And maybe off video I can show you I have the surgery on my phone, the pictures and what they did. So yeah, once they do that and they got to hammer it in, if they would have went in and they measured up my bone, once they shaved it down, they would have just did the total hip replacement. So
life is crazy, man. You go to sleep not knowing what's going to happen. You wake up and you're back.
I woke up and I was actually in the room with someone that was getting their other hip. My roommate or suite mate, he had just got his second hip full replacement. I was like, oh man, I'm in the hip replacement room. Oh, this is crazy. But yeah, it was good. It turned out great. So.